During the first quarter of 2020, the Federal Reserve printed more than $2 trillion with more on the way. This Fed's endless printing of US dollars is resulting in a new consequence from one of the largest holders of American debt, that is China. According to the Chinese news agency, China, which is the second largest foreign creditor, has decided not to wait for the devaluation of the US dollar and is now actively selling American debt. Aside from the massive printing of US dollars, another major issue for the Chinese has been the talking of the Fed of moving to negative interest rates. Now, as of Wednesday afternoon, the Fed announced it would not pursue that policy of negative interest rates at this time. But the discussion of negative interest rates has been going on for several months now. One of the qualities of money is its value. Once it's devalued, it becomes a tasteless salt. Besides, the US has been weaponizing the dollar all in the name of unlawful sanctions. China's decision is just the tip of the iceberg. Independent countries with backbone will follow suit. The entire world is fed up with America, even vassals are treated as enemies to be threatened into submission. China is unloading US treasuries because they know that America is going to bankruptcy, and there is no way the US can pay off its debt. This will send shockwaves through the global economy. China is now ditching the US debt that it holds over fears of the falling value of the US dollar, in an attempt to unseat the preeminence of the US dollar in global commerce. China owns more than $1 trillion US debt. Yesterday the Fed was on the edge of lowering the interest rates below zero. With all the QE, the zero interest rates, and the unlimited printing by the Fed, China saw the tsunami coming that will eventually crash the US dollar, and they are getting out of the way while they still can. The Fed may now buy up all the debt that the Chinese sell and use it to keep their knee on the neck of our nation. Our debt is beyond payable, and the symptoms will show up, leading to the collapse of the country and the dollar. The US debt stands currently at $26 trillion with trade deficits in the multi-billions of dollars. Add in the monthly interest payments in the multi-billions of dollars to service debt loads, you have a realistic picture of a truly insolvent or bankrupt US. It's all over but the screaming, folks. Why should China keep useless paper? All the United States is doing is printing paper money backed by nothing. This was bound to happen. The US is now in trouble. The US dollar is backed by ultra-reliable made-in-China printers. The federal budget deficit widened to $399 billion in May from $208 billion a year earlier. The US government's budget deficit rose 92% in May from a year earlier to $399 billion, as revenues plummeted and spending surged. The US dollar is getting weaker by the day. Powell openly admits that millions will not be returning to their jobs. Unemployment claims added another 1.5 million last week. 25,000 stores are predicted to close definitely this year. Mnuchin says over the next month, another $1 trillion will be pumped into the economy. Into the markets. Total US debt increased by $1 trillion in just a month. Fed sees rates near zero through 2022 and said it would continue with asset purchases. Federal Reserve officials on Wednesday forecast that its benchmark rate will stay near zero through 2022 and that the asset purchases would stay at the current pace. This is getting scary. The federal bank now holds over $7 trillion in debt. It was half of that just 3 months ago. Can't blame the Chinese. The US is rapidly becoming one of the most unstable countries on earth. Debt default and rapid collapse of US currency are now a distinct possibility. America is bankrupt, and the Fed will eventually fail. What they are doing is setting the price of assets to be much higher than market demand would indicate. They are stuck in a cycle of having to provide more and more support, cheap credit, asset buying, explicit guarantees for creditors for every decrease in demand. It may take years, but when the Fed fails, those assets will be priced at market value. China has made it clear it's not going to buy more US debt, and it will start selling all US debt. This is a real threat to the US and the dollar. The US needs places to soak up its debt. If China is selling US treasuries, then not only does the US have to soak them up, but it also loses a place to sell them. Henceforth, a double whammy effect that multiplies the effect of the initial sale. China is the second largest owner of US government debt, holding more than $1.1 trillion worth of treasuries. China's diversifying out of dollars has been underway for some time but picked up speed early last year. Those moves coincided with a surging appetite for government debt that's pushed down yields. The dollar is fast losing its place as an international currency. The list of countries using euros to buy and sell oil grows every year. The global sale of oil and natural gas in US dollars is what has kept the US dollar stable. China could weaponize its holdings and flood the markets with US bonds. This is worse than a nuclear attack on US soil. Some may think, well, even if China does sell the debt, it will have a minimal effect because the Fed would immediately buy it up. Why does it matter if China has $1 trillion in US debt? We are spending $3 trillion in stimulus boosts in 6 months. What difference does it make if they sell $1 trillion debt? We can just print more money and buy back the debt. Consider that if the US were to devalue the bonds to China by printing worthless money as China calls in its notes, what does it do to our other allies, Britain, Netherlands, France, etc.? That would create a disaster in the World Bank that would result in a depression that would make the current one look like a mild recession. China got us by the short and curly guys. That hurts like hell to say this, but this thing gave them some serious leverage. As the US creditability is sinking like a free-falling knife, the security of the reserve is much more important than the interests. China will sell all their bonds as soon as possible, just like the Russians did. The US prints money out of thin air, then helicopter the money to save the US, which will cost a great devaluation of everybody's reserve currency. The world is watching nervously. The day of the dollar collapsing is looming. China played us to the point of crushing our economy and adding trillions to our federal deficit. This pandemic may have been a payback for the tariffs. We will add 10 to 15 trillion in debt to our deficit. While they experienced minimal damage and purchased all the cheap oil on the market when crude crashed, to rebuild their economy within a year with minimal stimulus compared to our mountains of debt. While our dollar gets decimated and we have inflation kicking in after our economy tanks. The Chinese will have outpaced us in growth and production with a stronger currency. They played their hand very well, and now we need to pull all manufacturing out of there as soon as possible. The drawback is everything we buy for low prices is manufactured in China. Walk into Walmart, Home Depot, or any pharmacy, 70% of the product or its raw materials come from China. There are thousands of raw materials alone that go into our prescription drugs from China. America does not make anything it needs. It takes two to trade. They didn't force us to buy their goods and set up our manufacturing there. Short-sighted greed has a price. The Walton family has 6 of the nation's wealthiest individuals while their Walmart employees struggle to make ends meet. Similarly, Jeff Bezos has more money than most nations, but there seems to be a consensus that Amazon is a terrible behemoth to work for. It will take us years to get reliable supply chains set up that they currently have perfected, and even then, this will result in a $5 t-shirt from Walmart now costing us double if not triple along with everything else going up in price. This will cause a double hit to our economy. We are in for a very difficult 3 years or more coming our way after this. Our labor cost is higher. Americans are broke and want cheap stuff. We will never get those factory jobs back. The fault lies with moving the manufacturing away from the American workers in the never-ending pursuit of higher profits and compensations for executives and shareholders. Rather than getting more money to the American workers, our companies want to pay them as little as possible just to skyrocket the obscene amounts of wealth their investors already have. Free trade, the agenda of corporate interests, not only shipped middle and working class jobs overseas, it enabled countries like China to stockpile astounding amounts of dollars which either can be used to buy up real assets here, taking them out of American hands and control, or used as a weapon in the currency market. The bottom line is that free trade is purely and simply the agenda of shareholder value only radical theory. It is not your father's market system, which was far more moderate and had elements of social democratic restraint in it. It serves corporations only and hurts the middle and working classes. We need it to end. We need one-to-one trade deals again, not this WTO radicalism. We need the interests of our middle class, our working class, and our nation respected again. However, our long-term plan is we have no choice but to start manufacturing here in the USA. We have no other options. The solution would be bringing home offshore outsourcing companies. This within itself would be a near impossibility. Debt, too, would have to be paid down or written off by resetting the economy and paying the debt off with gold. The only other alternative is to feign financial stability by printing fiat money, which, in turn, will cause hyperinflation in the long run, murder the purchasing power of the dollar and drive prices to the moon. Too much debt around. The higher debt we have to finance, the bigger the multiplicative effect and the more bang for the buck China gets for the cost of dumping immature bonds. Due to the amount of existing debt we have to finance, even a slight rise in interest rate we have to pay and the amount China holds will push interest rate up by more than a small amount will cripple us. The cost would be many orders of magnitude higher than the amount China loses by selling immature bonds at a slight discount. It all comes to us being in too much debt already. The more we pile on, the more vulnerable we are. The only thing that saved the US in 2008 and may help us this time is the fact that the US dollar is still the world reserve currency. The day that we lose that status is the day we become like Venezuela. Unfortunately, we are over-relying on that fact and are overborrowing and overspending. At some point, all parties come to an end. With the current money-printing stimulus, who wouldn't dump their US Treasury? Recently, China, Japan, Russia, and many other countries sold trillions of US debts. As we raise debt and print more money, US dollar credibility is significantly lowered. I don't know who would be dumb enough to continue keeping US debt. With near zero interest rates, keeping US debt generates no income. After this virus, worldwide inflation is going to happen because we printed trillions of money. The US debt would be worthless. I don't think anyone doubts that our debt has been very desirable. Our problem is in going forward. We have bullied so many people with our control of international banking that more and more countries are looking for an alternative to the dollar. China, India, and Russia are already moving toward non-dollar currencies and gold. The EU has established a non-dollar version of SWIFT. There is a lot of inertia in a system as big as the dollar, but it seems things don't look good in the long run. We would end up with a depression that would make the 1930s look like the good old days. We live on credit cards. Because the US has allowed its companies to move manufacturing away from American workers in the never-ending pursuit of higher profits and compensations for executives and shareholders, now it has become vulnerable. China now owns a lot of the debt that has been built up buying Chinese goods, and now they have us over a barrel. We don't have any other alternatives to get what we need. Americans don't make anything anymore, leaving us with no leverage on global trade. When you have mortgaged your future to someone else, and you can't remortgage, they own you. American companies sold out America, and the people, with their votes and desire to shop Walmart instead of mom and pops, allowed it to happen. Isn't such a nice warm feeling that Republicans and Democrats have absolutely set our country up for complete economic disaster with their poor voting records that cheer massive spending? If the feds couldn't accumulate the debt, we would all be in breadlines. Republicans and Democrats have made a big business off our very unhealthy national debt. This big business, in return, allows for massive federal spending. The feds ultimately don't spend our taxes, they spend our great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandkids. If China sells just half of its holdings, that would be around half of its holding of $1.3 trillion. We will run into an economic crisis. The value of the US dollar will be down if not in half, provided that other countries do not follow suit in selling off the dollar from their reserve. Our purchasing power will be down significantly, thus followed by our standard of living and so on. The US should stop printing money where there is no gold or silver to back it up. And the US should live by it, means not just borrow it and let our next generations pay for it. The equity markets are only up because of the extended stimulus. When that money dries up, just wait for it. We are using every bullet in the gun to keep the market moving up, and we'll have nothing for when it's down. Plainly speaking, the next downturn is gonna hurt beyond anything in our lifetime, thus far. I say, thus far, as I believe this will become the new normal, big ups followed by hard lows. The US dollar is going to lose its reserve status. It's going to lead us into third world country status. People will be killing each other for a cup of water and gasoline. The sanctions pushed the rest of the countries over the edge. The Fed is a privately owned bank working for the benefit of other banks. They will sell us the rope that we will use to hang them with. They have been plundering, profiteering, and selling our country and its lives for decades. Welcome back to the Atlantis Report. You are here for your daily dose of the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The Chinese have their plan in mind and are slowly, as the opportunity presents itself, implementing it. As the US pushes at China, another brick in the wall comes into play. Whether it be of necessity or born from choice, China is an up-and-coming world-ruling power. All these events placed upon China only serves to make the Chinese make a move for their own betterment. American financial pundits may criticize China for selling its U.S. Treasury holdings as being a reckless action. The U.S. has waved a red flag in the face of the Chinese, in the form of trade duties and criticism of Chinese trade action. This has resulted in the Chinese having reached their boiling point and the resulting loss of rationale. Anything goes from here. One Belt One Road is One Belt One Road is the Chinese way to unload the U.S. treasures. President Trump seems to have Japan in his crosshairs also. No one is safe around him. Japan should take notice and worry too. Japan is the largest holder of U.S. debt with $1.268 trillion in treasury holdings. This is the highest level of debt owned by Japan in several years, beating out China as the largest holder of U.S. debt. After China dumps U.S. debt, I don't believe anyone else would buy it, meaning inflation is coming. No doubt about it, the U.S. dollar is headed into serious trouble. U.S. debt to the tune of $26 trillion and trade deficits in the multi-billions of dollars, not to mention the multi-billions of dollars monthly, to service that debt makes the future for the U.S. dollar settle on very thin ice. The U.S. dollars are worth much less when they just printed trillions of more. Only fools would buy U.S. bonds. I can't say I blame China, considering how we have been treating them. The American capitalists went to China for cheap labor and for their vast market. The U.S. corporates benefited from cheap labor. Capitalist greed would finally bring down the West. And the fools of Wall Street actually thought that doing business with China would Americanize them. That shows you that having lots of money doesn't necessarily mean that you have any brains. Invest your money in buying silver, gold, and farmland. The U.S. has gotten over for nearly 50 years. It's over. If you are not prepared when it all hits the fan, you will go hungry. America is finished, it is a failed state. The empire is collapsing. Cut military spending and close all U.S. foreign bases. Start taking care of the people. This was the Atlantis Report. Please like, share, subscribe, leave me a comment. And please take some time to subscribe to my backup channels, I do upload videos there too. You'll find the links in the description box.